So Gina, should we get going? It's a few minutes after 11:30. I always want to be respectful of those who made the effort to get here on time, and we'll likely hear dings as people sign on. But
absolutely,
let's get going. So the extent of my responsibility this morning, hi, it's Olivia Rayner, is to welcome you and appreciate your promptness for the call, for our monthly telephone call, and to turn this over to Gina, who's been talking to Heather about presenting to our group today. So Gina, let me turn it to you.
Good morning, everyone. Right now we've got 19, so people are rapidly joining us. Just want to take this minute to introduce Heather Weldon. She's the program manager for supported employment in the city of Seattle, and that's nested under the Department of Human Resources. And Heather is a tremendous source. She is doing something that was first in the country, and that is to have an embedded job developer with a government agency within government. And so she has some really very, very useful tips and techniques and advice on how she's been able to achieve the amazing things that she has done. And I can't wait till you see how many people they currently have in the city of Seattle. And she is a tremendous resource and really wants to answer any and all questions that we may have for California. So without further ado, I am so happy to be introducing Heather Weldon. Thank you for taking time to talk with us this morning, Heather.
Thank you so much, Gina. This is so exciting. Thank you for inviting me to speak with your group today. So I am available to stay on the call longer than 1 hour. If folks have questions, I just want you to know I'm fully committed to being here as long as you need. So why don't we begin? I hope you can all see that first slide there that shows me and rainy Seattle behind me. And I will begin with the end of the story by letting you know where we are today, and then I will let you know how we got to where we are today. So today, and here's just a few statistics, we have 97 employees with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and most of them, let's see, the average working schedule is anywhere between 20 hours a week and 40 hours a week. And 80% of the opportunities are in office settings. That's just because those are the settings that I wanted to target when I started it up. We do have about 20% doing janitorial and custodial warehousing work, and working in the Parks Department, doing landscaping and that kind of work. But what I've found is really targeting the office jobs set the bar very high in terms of what people with intellectual and developmental disabilities could do and wanted to do. So these are definitely the types of jobs that I'm finding kids getting right out of high school are wanting to target. More than some of the more labor-oriented jobs, but we still have a few labor-oriented jobs for those who really that's where their passion is. So you can see our average wage is $15.90 an hour for our supported employment positions within City of Seattle departments, and they all come with great benefits, all the same city benefits that any employee gets. So in addition to the wage, people get paid vacation and paid sick time and a couple of floating holidays every year, as well as the federal holidays that we all take. Those are paid as well. And retirement and deferred compensation if they choose to participate in that. So it's a great benefits package. And I find that's the case with most of the government jobs in the nation. They have a really nice benefits package. So I will tell you now how we got here. It all started with an embedded job developer. So this position that I'm in right now, initially it was funded by a demonstration grant by our Washington State Vocational Rehabilitation. And the goal of the grant was, it was just an 18-month grant, 18 months, and the goal of the grant was for the embedded job developer to develop 30 new jobs for people with IDD in City of Seattle departments by the end of 18 months. And I'll let you know, I wasn't the first person to take this job. I had heard about this 18-month grant-funded position, and I thought, oh my gosh, working in city government, the bureaucracy, I know job development's hard enough in the private sector. What would it be like in the public sector? So I actually didn't apply for this job. I heard that someone, a really good job developer, had taken the job, and I thought, well, that's good. I knew who she was. She's really good. And then about 2 or 3 weeks after she had taken the job, I got a call from the technical assistance agency who had written the grant and said, you know what, that original person quit. So the embedded job developer quit after about 2 weeks, saying that this really was an impossible job, that there really wasn't a lot of interest within city departments. There was no funding for the positions. There were barriers with the unions. And the list went on and on and on. And I thought, gosh, it's worse than I thought. It's a really hard job. And so long story short, the folks who wrote the grant said, are you interested in taking it? You only have 17 months now because we already paid her for a couple of weeks of work. So I said yes. And I decided to say yes because I thought if I said no, then in a way I'm complicit with making an agreement that, yes, indeed, it is impossible and that these barriers were insurmountable. So at that point, I decided that I would specialize in impossible projects and make them possible. So I got to the city 1 month into that 18-month grant, and the city of Seattle, they gave me a cubicle and a desk and a computer and said, good luck. And so I quickly had to learn, you know, what is this thing called city government? What is a municipality? You know, what's the relationship the mayor has with the city council, and kind of go back to my memories of Schoolhouse Rock, if any of you remember those great teaching songs on TV teaching us kids about government and how a bill becomes a law. So I studied up real quick and figured out how some of those things worked. And then I looked at the initial challenges. So from day one, from my perspective, because there was no special funding for these 30 positions, that definitely got my attention really fast. I thought, oh my gosh, where are we going to get the money for 30 positions? And then there was the issue of the unions, because we were talking about having these positions not be union positions. And the city of Seattle was fairly heavily union represented. However, our managers and executives and folks in the HR department, they are not union represented. So we were looking at that, and then there was the challenge of building partnerships with our employment providers. We call them employment vendors or employment providers. Those are the agencies locally here that would be providing us with candidates with disabilities and also providing us with the support of job coaches intermittently to support the jobs on and off. And then the other initial challenge was finding a job title that we could work with. And then the FTEs, which give us the vacancies to hire people into. And then, of course, the customization of the jobs. And then finding supporters, which are those managers who are going to say, yes, I'll hire someone. And then just marketing the idea. So looking at that within the first few days of me getting my desk and my cubicle and my computer here at the city, it felt pretty daunting, and there didn't seem to be many answers in sight. So studying the problem, I came up with some ideas about how to tackle those. And, oh, I love this slide. Gina helped me with this. Thank you, Gina. What's the secret to Seattle's success? So that's Todd on the left, that's TJ in the middle, and Scott on the right. And they were actually one of the first supported employees we hired when we started out. But one of the ways we decided to tackle all of those initial challenges that you saw were to think very differently. And I pause when I say this because it cannot be underlined enough. Thinking differently about the problems, those challenges, and really deciding to create a new understanding for every person who worked within a City of Seattle department. And when I say creating a new understanding, I really am talking about how do we change people's minds. Changing minds by giving them a new understanding. So, in order to change minds and create a new understanding of what supported employment could mean, I looked at that initial list and quickly reversed my priorities. Even though that number one up there, funding 30 positions, that one I could put 20 exclamation points after because that one was the one that had the biggest red flag and blinking lights around it for me because that's a lot of money. And actually the supervisor that I had within the city, she quickly pulled out her calculator. I think it was within my first week here, and she said, "Heather, I don't know where you're going to find the money. This is about $500,000 in wages. We don't have that." And I thought, yeah, I hear ya. But when I reversed the priorities and I looked at what it would take to create a new understanding within every mind that I met with, marketing the idea really came to the top, not focusing on finding the money first, because I knew if I could help people reach a new understanding, I could create a new level of motivation, and creating intrinsic motivation within every individual I met with. I knew that they knew how to find the money for things that were hot priorities for them personally. So I decided it really wasn't my job to try and get the powers that be to come up with $500,000 promise for something that they didn't really even have an understanding of what it was, because naturally they would say no because they didn't really have an understanding yet. And so that really was my number one priority, was to market the idea of supported employment, to educate people about what is customized employment and what were the benefits for the department, not what are the benefits for the clients or the candidates, because that is how we normally think, is we're very person-centered, we are very client-focused, but when we are entering into the business arena or the employer arena, it has to be all about the employer. Even though in my mind and my heart I had the candidates completely front and center, but I didn't talk about it to the employer that way. So I had to come up with, how do I talk to the departments and create a new understanding, like painting a new picture, a new landscape of something that they hadn't seen before. And then I found my second priority when I went from reversing my priorities. My second priority quickly became finding supporters. Where do I find these managers who are going to say yes? And then customizing the jobs within those workplaces. And priorities 4, 5, 6, and 7 started coming together because I started creating an army of support. That's the way I saw it, was recruiting soldiers into this army of new understanding, because those managers, as they got on board one by one, each one knew how to find funding in their budget for things that they really believed in and felt strongly about and knew that would bring them value. So the most common way that managers ended up funding these positions was through what they call salary savings. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that budget term, basically any time a department has budgeted for a full-time or part-time job but it's gone vacant, that money is still there, even though that engineering position hasn't been recruited for yet. There's always vacancies in larger departments that they've budgeted for those positions, but they've gone vacant for a few months. Well, I tell you, 3 months of an engineering position gone vacant, that's a supported employment position for the full year. And I didn't know about how to deal with budgets and some of the creative ways that managers figured out how to fund these positions, because I'm not a budget person, but I am someone who knew how to help them have a new understanding of what supported employment could bring to their workplace. And so each manager found different ways to fund them. So moving through to the next, making the business case. Any questions? Anyone want to jump in? Yeah.
Heather, this is Gina. I just wanted to read you some of the comments in the chat box.
Oh, great. Fabulous.
Linda O'Neill says, very impressive. Richard says, great reverse priority to pay off. And Olivia says, I like the framing of the issue, developing a new understanding. We talk a lot about raising expectations. It gets away from the vision, value to knowledge.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. So this is the feedback you're getting so far.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for jumping in with that. And if you're seeing any questions, please feel free to jump in. I'll definitely have lots of time at the end, but I'm also happy to take questions along the way. If there's any burning questions or you need to back me up if something doesn't make sense, please jump in by all means. So this is actually a picture of our mayor with his office, his supported employee within his office, Krista, and I guess I'll just make an aside note here that being strategic in terms of which offices you target in government is very important. So naturally, I always make sure there is one supported employee in the mayor's office and one supported employee in our legislative department, which is where our city council members are housed. So having a supported employee in the mayor's office has some unique challenges because, as you know, the mayor's office administration turns over every few years. So the unique challenge with that is that the mayor, the incoming new mayor, oftentimes releases and terminates all the employees who used to work for the past mayor, and the new mayor brings in all their own staff. So that's one of my challenges, is making sure that Krista doesn't get fired with all the old administration staff once the new administration comes in. But it's a great opportunity to have to go through that struggle and that conversation with the new administration every time one comes in. It's always, I feel like I'm always on the verge of potentially having Krista lose her job, but you know, those are the risks of having to be strategic and play the political game of making sure that that employees with disabilities are visible and then in well-placed strategic locations as well. But Krista's actually survived, gosh, almost 4 administrations now. So I have a really good feeling. I'm much more confident than I was during the first couple of administration changeovers, because now that she's got the longevity, I don't anticipate any incoming mayor wanting to let go of Krista, who's been there now for 17 years. So But let's see. Some of the marketing ideas that I use, and I will say that the making the business case is really important. And at the same time, what you see on your screen is by all means not a recipe. So it's not a recipe that if you talk about inclusive workplaces and you give some examples of cost savings and then you go down that list, bada boom, bada bang, you know, you bake that cake and that cake comes out and you've got an employment opportunity for someone. I wish it were that simple, but there really is not a formula. So I definitely want to put that out there that it's not a recipe. However, I see all of these and more as ingredients. So using these ingredients as needed and keeping your audience in mind, what will motivate them and what will they find most valuable? Because in talking to some workplaces, sometimes that number one, inclusive workplaces, that may be what is most of value to them. So I will really target talking about the benefit of diversity, including someone who has been traditionally excluded from our workplaces, and talking about some of the benefits that happen, like team building. I have so many managers who will say, gosh, I've sent my teams to team building trainings for years, but nothing seemed to bring the team together like hiring a supported employee. People seem to rally around someone who needed a little extra help, and it really shifted some of the attitudes that people had about themselves and who they were in their workplace. So that might be just what one workplace needs to hear. Another might look to the bottom bullet and say, you know what, we've had trouble retaining entry-level employees. So I would love to look at how we could bundle some tasks that in our workplace that seem to be parts of jobs that turn over more quickly, and having a supported employee may stabilize that. Other folks will find value in the improved workflow. Oftentimes when I'm working with workplaces and identifying where those entry-level tasks are, we find bottlenecks in workflow, and then we're able to free up other staff by having them let go of some of their entry-level duties. That frees them up to do 100% of their spend 100% of their time on the more complex and high-level tasks. That's the cost savings right there if I'm working with an office who has mostly professional-level staff, but 10 to 15% of each of those staff's time is spent doing entry-level work. I can bundle all of those tasks into a job for a supported employee, and now those more expensive tasks are happening 100% by each of those employees. So that's what I think about in terms of increasing, well, it's a more effective division of labor. And so I will talk about that more efficient division of labor argument with folks that might be very bottom line oriented. And they know they have professional level positions, and 10% of what each of those people are doing are involve more basic kind of routine tasks. And I will pose the question, what if all of your staff no longer had to get their own mail or shred their own documents or refill the copy machine when it came up empty or do this or do that? And I put together task lists that have a lot of those kinds of duties in it, and I find that professional folks, about 10 to 15% of their time is spent doing those kinds of jobs. So it's a more effective cost or division of labor, and that's a cost savings right there. Finding managers who say yes. What I found was, first of all, every single manager that I talked to or presented to, I presented to a lot of teams, a lot of teams of directors and managers. I met with all levels of staff within city government. And I can safely tell you that most of those yeses were no's in the beginning. And that's what made me start realizing, what are they saying no to? They are saying no to their understanding of what they think this experience will be. And that's when I realized that every no could potentially turn into a yes, but I had to keep the conversation going. So I started expecting each first meeting would probably end with them saying, no thanks, Heather, I don't think we have that kind of work here, or, you know, I don't really have the time to supervise someone like that, or, you know, other kinds of barriers. But I'd say, you know, that's fine, I understand, I'd love to stay in touch with you. So I'd let them have a couple weeks and then I'd follow up with them, because what I found was people change their mind over time, but they have to do it on their own terms, and they also have to ask all their questions that they're oftentimes embarrassed to ask in that first meeting because they don't know me. Who am I? So why should they be vulnerable and ask their silly questions or take the risk that they might not know what the right word for this disability is, or that people are afraid to be politically incorrect. So, you know, one of the things I oftentimes tell groups that I'm working with is, you know what, first of all, there's no such thing as a silly question, and you can use whatever word is comfortable for you. I'm not going to be the ADA police, and I'm not going to correct you. What I find is if I keep working with them, if they're not using the right language, they come around because we end up modeling the way for them, and we rub off on them. But, you know, resist the temptation to shame them, because I can tell you there's a lot of job developers out there that I've talked to who will say, oh, I didn't want to work with that employer again because, you know, they use this word and obviously they're not educated enough or whatever. And I thought, you're not going to meet with them a second time and give them the chance to, you know, have you rub off on them, you know. So we've got to keep that relationship going and that conversation going, because it's through the conversation that that person will begin to have a new understanding, and their mind and heart will begin to change. But you have to establish credibility with them. And I know we hear the term building relationships all the time. So, you know, I try to not use that phrase building relationships very often, because what I really mean by building relationships is you becoming a familiar person to that stranger. You becoming someone who's familiar, someone who's trusted, someone who they will eventually follow your lead, because you have established your credibility and trust with them to that deep level that they are willing to follow you into unknown territory, and that they've become vulnerable and are allowing themselves to see a new possibility where they had not previously. So in working with unions, what I found was taking advantage of the folks who work with the unions the best. That's the Labor Relations Division within every government entity has labor relations folks. And those labor relations people are excellent. They have personal relationships with union representatives, with the heads of the unions. So working with the Labor Relations Division, I found that there were misperceptions on the union's part. There were fears. There was, first of all, the fear that perhaps I was going to replace union jobs with these unrepresented jobs, or that as I was customizing jobs and bundling tasks, that I might be skimming union work. So the first thing we did was we actually sent out a letter to all the unions, and it came out from our Labor Relations Division, saying, you know, this is an initiative we were wanting to move forward on. We were just looking at 30 possible positions out of the 10,000 employees that we employ. We really wanted to be a more inclusive workplace and find a way to include people with IDD. And as we started that ball rolling, we found that the unions were absolutely willing to engage, especially when we started talking about how we're not looking at 5,000 positions. We're going to start with 30. And even beyond that, one job at a time. That was another thing. I actually quickly learned the hard way not to talk as much about the 30 positions being a goal, because the number 30 was a lot for a lot of people. And so what I realized was, by being more careful with my language and the words I was choosing to use and put out there, it got me a lot farther. And when I started talking about just one job at a time and making a presentation to our utilities department and not talking to them about my grant goals, and just simply saying, I'm looking for an opportunity. I'd love to meet with you and see if I can help you identify some unmet needs in your workplace. People really opened up. So I had to look at what language am I using that might be pushing that employer to a no without even knowing it. And that was one of the things, talking about it in terms of 30 positions, completely overwhelming to most of the managers that I spoke to. So I quickly had to shut up and just really talk about it as one job at a time, one job at a time. And really that philosophy carried over to working with our employment vendors in our community who were referring us candidates, because what I found was they kind of had that similar idea of advocating by the caseload, meaning that if I developed one job, I would find that our employment providers, they would fill out an application for every single person on their caseload. So I literally, for one supported employment position, I got hundreds and hundreds of applications. So I decided I need to use that one person at a time, one job at a time philosophy when teaching our community agencies how to advocate and work with employers. So I made phone calls to all of our community agencies and said, okay, I just got the big envelope in the mail with 100 applications that looks like your entire caseload, but I'm going to ask you to do the hard work of doing the sorting and come up with one person you want to advocate for. And that was really different for our agencies. They were used to dropping off applications with employers for all of their clients they were working with and letting the employer do the hard job of sorting through those applications. And I know that people with IDD oftentimes don't look great on paper. They're not going to have a great looking application. They're not going to have a great looking resume, because resumes are marketing tools designed to market all of your vast experience and all of your past credentials and work skills and all of those good things. So why would we want to drop 100 resumes or applications on an employer and then hope that they find one of our candidates suitable for one of their jobs? So we started reshaping the way our agencies were advocating for their candidates. And I said to them, you know, you're going to have to advocate for one person at a time, and I'm not saying you need to advocate for the person with the most skills or who you think will be easiest to place. I said, you can advocate for the person you view on your caseload as having the most complex and significant disability, but you choose to put that person forward, and that person is who is going to be in the running for a job. And that was a really different way of advocating, and I realized that our community agencies had been doing that kind of advocacy, dropping off a stack of resumes with employers for a really long time. And not knowing really how to advocate for one person at a time and putting one person forward, not necessarily their traditionally best candidate, but who did they choose to put forward and really, put time into. So that was a new way of advocating. But I really took that approach with our departments as well, taking the one job at a time approach. There's Steve. So Steve works in our public utilities department, and he's been there a really long time. He's a great example of someone who when I got down to it and I was talking to agencies, and I said, you don't have to put your person forward who you think is going to be the easiest to place. You can choose the client you are most challenged in terms of finding a job for. And one of the agencies said, well, we'll put forward someone who we've considered unemployable. And so they put forward Steve. And that was a really fun experience because we together designed a job that we thought Steve could do, and working with one of the departments did a lot of education with them around supported employment. And then when we got Steve in there to kind of do a working interview and check out some of the tasks that we thought he could do, like opening up the paper trays on the printers and refilling them and doing some things like that, we realized Steve actually just didn't have the strength. And so by that time, the workplace, though, was so invested in Steve and the idea of supported employment and including someone who had traditionally been excluded that they really stepped up and stepped in, and they said, well, we're just going to have to identify some other tasks that Steve can do. And that's when I realized, wow, this is becoming bigger than me. This is that creating an army of support. And I no longer had to be the one to turn to the supervisor and say, gosh, I'm sorry, I thought Steve had more strength. Can I find some more tasks here for him? I know the ones we had found aren't going to work. It was the supervisor and the two coworkers in on the interview who said, we're committed to Steve. We're going to find other tasks. And they did. And they're not tasks that I would have even known about, but they were important tasks that Steve's now been doing for, 15 years. So one of the things why I put interview process and onboarding up there is one of the differences in how we do our interview process for supported employees is that, of course, job coaches get to be in on the interview, and we don't really sit down and have a panel interview. It's actually more of a let's walk around the office and show you some of the potential tasks, and the job coach can kind of check out the tasks too. And usually when we have a job opening, it's not been fully developed yet. So we've got a loose outline of some of the main tasks, but once the department chooses the candidate they want to hire, then we get to develop the job more fully around the person who ends up in the job, so customizing it even further. I put this up here, philosophical issues, because I know this is oftentimes a question is, well, why did you guys have a mandate? Did you have a decree? Did the powers that be say that city employments would hire 50 supported employees, or how did you deal with that piece of it? So I just put this down here because it's just from my experience that it is far quicker and simpler to create impact via mandate, but the outcomes are so much more sustainable and meaningful when they are achieved by people actually changing their mind and having a new understanding. Because then we're not making people do things. And I understand sometimes you do need a mandate, but I would always say if you're going to go with a mandate, you've got to make sure you're educating and creating that new understanding for people along the way. Otherwise, people will agree to comply with mandates or, you know, those kinds of initiatives, but in their heart of hearts, they may have not changed their mind, and so over time, it's not as sustainable. I know our county had more of a mandate approach many years ago, and as soon as the county executive left, the supported employment efforts completely fizzled. And now that they're trying to breathe new life into their supported employment efforts, they're realizing there's some complexities around some of the bitterness. Let's just say that the managers there felt they had to hire people or meet quotas. They were mandated. There was a decree. And so their supported employees who are there that, they didn't really want them there. They never really understood those people. And so consequently over the years, the tasks have gone away and some of those supported employees aren't as productive anymore. And so the person who's in the equivalent of my role now at our county has to do some cleanup, let's just say, and some educating and helping find new tasks for those supported employees, and then go through that process of helping change people's minds and help them reach a new understanding. But now see, they've got an understanding that's pretty deeply rooted because of the experience they've had, because they all had to hire a certain number of people. So this is just something to keep in mind. But I like to think of this as the changed mind is a very powerful thing. When I leave the city here, this will not all fall apart because there's an army of support. And then just wrapping up here, and then I'm happy to take any questions, I thought, you know what, I've just thrown a ton of information at you guys. So if I could just leave you with 3 key elements, 3 ingredients for success, they would be to always focus on the workplace needs. I know we have our own, in our field, our philosophical values around person-centered planning, people-focused, person-focused, people first, nothing about me without me, all of those, of course, those are absolutely important. And we don't need to use all of that in our first and second meetings with an employer. If we make the employer first when we're talking with the employer, then we will eventually absolutely meet the needs of the people that we are trying to find jobs for. And then the second ingredient for success, I would say, is really paying attention to the language we use. So I call it the art of language. How we talk about anything defines it. So what words are we going to use? And I think back to me deciding I can't say 30 anymore. I got to talk about this as one job at a time, and not using the word client, but using the word candidate. Really focusing on how can we turn some of our internal social service language into business language. Because if the employer feels like you are advocating for them, then they will advocate for the ultimate outcome that you're working toward. And 3, back to the making this bigger than you. I'm always looking for how can I include more people in the workplace and get more people on board. We've all been there when if you have any experience job developing, you've been making progress with working with an employer, and then that supervisor you've been working with goes on maternity leave or takes a different job, and then all of a sudden the job falls apart and there's no job. So learning from that lesson, I am always asking managers for our next meeting, who else should we include and meet with and talk with? So that it's always an ever-expanding circle. And that goes for once that person with a disability is employed. I'm always looking at who else can this person get to know and looking for those natural supports, as we call it, but making it more than that, making it so much bigger than you that it survives without you being a part of it. And I like to think of that as instead of building yourself into the job, you are looking to build others in the workplace into the job. So always trying to build others. How can we build others? And then this is just our final slide, and that is Warren, and he's been here for several years. And this is just some language from a document that I have here because I think it's a good way to think about how to present what it is we're doing to employers. So I just say that we offer city departments a creative and cost-effective approach to meeting business needs while diversifying and expanding their workforce to include people with IDD. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. Of course, I could continue on, and I have probably a day or two's worth of information. But I think this is a great place for a pause and just see where you are and what you're thinking about and anything I can clarify for you.
So this is Gina. We have a couple. Joyce says music to my ears, and we have Olivia is asking a couple questions. She says, 1, how are candidates referred to you? And 2, do all employees have job coaches? Do some transition to natural support? If they are having trouble on the job, do they go to you or to their supervisor?
Okay, so
the first question was, how are candidates referred to you?
Yes, great. Okay, candidates are referred. So through our, they all have to be eligible for services through our county division of developmental disabilities. So essentially they have to be eligible for support services. So that means eligible for a job coach. And you know, everyone technically has a job coach who works through supported employment, but boy, I tell you, those job coaches, many of them are only checking in maybe every couple of months. The natural supports are firmly in place, and I would say for a good handful or more, they probably don't need their job coaches there anymore. The only reason that the coach still checks in is because I know that coworkers and supervisors turn over. And even though it has been a magical relationship for 5 years, I know that people change. And I know the supported employee could be there for 30 years. I really don't doubt that, but I know that even though the natural supports are firmly in place, it could change. And just having the coach who's doing a minimal check-in can catch that when those changes happen and then reassemble a new army of support in that workplace and re-educate the new supervisor and then educate the new coworkers, or we both go in there together.
Thank you. There's another question from Olivia. She says, can the employees become union members? Would there be an advantage or disadvantage for their jobs to become union?
We do actually have, let's see, about 5 support employees are in the union now. It honestly would be a disadvantage, only because the union's rules around last hired, first fired when there's layoffs, and any employee who's been here a few years, any support employee who's been here a few years, entering into a union position, they'd lose their service hour or their service years, their service credits in terms of the years they've been employed. Anytime someone switches a title and goes into a new job title, then they are technically in their department considered, you know, the most recently hired person into that job classification. And if it's union and there's an economic downturn or that department's doing some downsizing and layoffs or a new executive comes in and wants to change things around, they can technically terminate those most recently hired folks. So we experimented a little bit with turning a couple of the supported employment positions into union positions, and within a year they were at risk because it was during our economic downtime. So I actually, we ended up reclassifying them back into their supported employment title, just so on the books they were still in what we call, it's an office maintenance aide. That's the title we use for these positions. So it's office/maintenance aide, and it's just a very open general title. You can see that someone could be doing office work, they could be doing maintenance work, they could be aiding and assisting in some way. So office maintenance aide is the title that we've created for these positions. So yeah, it's just kind of touchy, but we do have 5 support employees in union positions, and they've been in those a long time. So I think those people are fine. They would have to start off in a union position, probably that more so than having them switch over after having been in a supported employment position. In a way, they kind of almost have more protection in a supported employment title, just because there's so much education throughout the departments. They know what that means when our budget office sees office maintenance aide, they know that's a supported employee. So they'll know, oh, wow, they're trying to lay off an office maintenance aide title versus, oh, they're trying to lay off an administrative specialist. They won't know. Yeah, so there's just such an awareness in the culture now that they know, wow, this is a bigger issue. We're not just laying off an employee here. We're flushing many years of state dollars that have gone into a job coach supporting the person and them learning their job and then stabilizing. So there's that in the consciousness within our departments.
Great. We have about 6 to 7 minutes left.
Okay.
To 12:30. And Janice says, thank you. This has been amazing and very helpful. Mark asks, who funds your position and why were the jobs non-union? I think maybe you answered that. It's easier to deal with union concerns if the jobs you create are within the bargaining unit.
Okay, I can.
So who funds your position?
Yeah, so my position for the first 18 months, I was funded by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So that was the demonstration grant through our state. And then actually 2 years after that grant ended, or after 18 months, then in the 19th and 20th month, and then for 2 years, our Division of Developmental Disabilities, actually through some millage money, I believe, picked me up and paid for me to stay within the city. And then after that, in 2002, the city decided, wow, we need to just hire this position and not keep dilly-dallying around with hoping there's going to be some kind of external funding. So I'm actually a full-fledged city employee now and employed by the city, so the city pays for me. Now, the reason we didn't go with union is, for one reason, there's so many rules around how you hire and the need for competitive hiring and competitive recruitment, and then the positions would need to be posted and recruited from the general public and all of that. And it doesn't have to be the case every time, but this was the fastest way for us to get some wins really quickly. And so actually these positions are considered exempt, and so typically that exempt status is hire at will, which is usually reserved for management positions and executive positions. Just because you can appoint someone into a position like this. So we chose to go with an exempt status because that meant that we could almost appoint these employees and therefore not have to go through the competitive hiring and recruitment, posting it on our website, and then, opening it up for the world to apply for each one of these positions. We could create more of a special process around this and really open it up for just people with IDD. So that, and at first I was worried that departments would take advantage of that hire at will. No one has taken advantage of it. They treat them just like they're civil service classified union positions. So I can safely say the exempt status has worked out great to give us that flexibility in hiring. And then also if it doesn't work, if it's really not a good job match, the supervisor knows that they can work with the employment vendor to find a better candidate. They don't abuse that either, but it's kind of it makes it easier for the departments to say yes, because with our civil service process, it could take years to fire a bad employee, unfortunately. And so when they hear that these positions are exempt, they say, oh, that's great. So, you know, if it's really not working out, we can just get a different employee. I'm like, yeah.
Great. So we have a couple more comments.
Sure.
Actually, Richard says, great call, thank you. Linda says, great program, should serve as a model for all cities all over the country. Mark says, this is a different paradigm for job development in public sector. Usually we have the thought of development of jobs through leadership from the top. This is more organic and easier to get going.
Yep.
And that's what we have in the chat box. And we have 3 more minutes.
Great.
Till 12:30. Open it up on the line if anybody on the phone has any questions you'd like to ask.
Hi, this is Olivia again, and believe if others have questions, please interrupt me because I think like 8 of them written down here, so I won't get to all of them. I'm wondering if it sounds like your work really has led to some policy changes, everything from the the invention in essence of the creation of your position. Have there been any other changes in operational policies within the government or anything that else that is sort of falls within the policy realm in terms of job hiring and job practices? Did that came as a result of your work?
Well, definitely hiring practices and definitely how we do performance evaluations is a little modified, but it's similar. How we do, interviewing and recruitment has changed. How we do training on the job has definitely changed. You know, the whole idea of allowing a job coach in to really kind of be on hand to help with training in the beginning of the job. That we also, I did write an ordinance that created the initial, there were 50 FTEs. So those are basically the vacancies, the full-time equivalencies, FTEs. Those created the vacancies for departments to hire so that they didn't have to wait for a secretary position to open up and then kind of chisel it down to be a supported employment position. So that I've written 2 of those ordinances now. So we've used the initial 50 vacancies, and now we're, well on our way to using up the next 50, so I'll probably have to do another ordinance asking for another 50 vacancies, essentially. I'd say everything changed around how the city hires and includes people, because this is such a customized approach now that the city is looking at other populations that they can use this customized approach with. And our mayor's office has talked to me about potentially working with people who were formerly incarcerated, as well as immigrant and refugee populations and others, and basically not making them supported employees, but using some of these principles and practices to better support those populations in coming into the workplace and being successful on a long-term basis.
Great, thank you.
Brings us to 12:30. Are there any last questions for Heather?
Well, this is Mark. I just wanted to underline sort of the different perspective that she gave, because 10 years ago, coming out of Washington State, one of the big lessons was you need leadership from the top, both within Multnomah County and within state employment. But what Heather has done is reverse this and build things organically from within. And you've made the strong case that, that's more sustainable. And so I think in California we should really think about that and think of how to implement that. It's really, quite dramatic.
Yeah. It doesn't have to come from the top. This is definitely more of a grassroots approach, although I did definitely connect with department heads within the city. I also worked a lot with frontline staff and everyone in between.
Thank you for that.
I think it's important who gets hired as the job coach to do that work, because it has to be somebody like Heather.
Well, and I'll tell you, that's a great question, because the county to the north of us, Snohomish County, just hired a position just like mine. And like I said, King County, our major seat of our state that Seattle resides within, just hired a job developer, as well as Microsoft is now doing this, and Starbucks is considering this. And so as they're doing that, the people they've hired they're very different than the person I am, and I'm working with them, and I'm seeing that their results are different, and they are doing some things differently. And it does depend on how the leadership influences them. In some ways, in a way, I now realize I had it really good because nobody here cared or wanted to do it. And I thought that was a barrier initially, but I realized I was able to actually create something really unique because no one was really looking or cared. But there's a lot of people looking now at the counties nearby who are doing this and Microsoft. And so there's a lot more input that job developer is having to take in, and a lot more hands in the pie and in the kitchen, so to speak. So it's interesting watching how those different programs are now evolving and getting off the ground, but they are definitely going to have some different outcomes and different structures than we've created here at the city.
Yeah,
so there was
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. There's been a request for a copy of this presentation. There's also other materials we will make available to you and have Rachel send out. We have copies of questions, Heather Reeded questions, interview questions, and other resources. Richard is asking for a copy of the job descriptions in your city.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
How about I send all of that to Gina, and then Gina can forward it out? I'm also happy to take emails from anyone who wants to email me or phone call. I really am an accessible person, so please take me up on that if I can help you in any way. And I will tell you, every single job description is different than the next. So we don't have all of those written down because they're all customized, but I can give you a task list that I oftentimes use as a conversation starter with workplaces to help them start getting their creative juices bubbling around where those tasks might be. So I can send that to Gina.
Great. And
just out of curiosity, in terms of customizing these jobs, what is the size of the departments you're working with? How small and how large?
Our smallest department has 15 people. They're generally called offices, Office of Economic Development, Office of this, Office of that. So there'll be, there could be 10 to 15 people in one of those smaller departments, and then up to 2,000 in a larger utilities.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
And that's why we can have so many employees. People hear the number, nearly 100 supported employees, and they think, oh my gosh, is this a sheltered workshop? And I'm like, no. And in fact, many of those support employees don't even know each other because, they're spread out in different buildings and different floors and, offices north of downtown and south of downtown. So, we've got a pretty big operation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, as the young kids say, give a shout out to Sarah Murphy. She was the one who had heard and met Heather and recommended and connected us together. So thank
Oh,
you to
wonderful.
Sarah on that.
Thank you, Sarah.
And Heather, thank you so much for your time today, your generosity of sharing all of this amazing information that completely turns how we've been thinking about everything on its head. And I think it was something that you could tell by the energy on this call that people really needed and appreciated hearing you today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for all of that.
Gina, I have to give you a special thanks because for those of you on the phone here, this is my very first PowerPoint, and Gina helped me create it. So thank you so much, Gina. I haven't done that before.
PowerPoint. It's wonderful.
I got to give Gina some credit there. She helped me.
You.
This is wonderful. So thanks for being my first test audience. And I will let you know, I actually feel like it's my duty now to get this information out there. So I will tell you again, please don't be shy. Please call me or email me if I can be of any assistance. Nobody has to reinvent the wheel. We got it pretty good here. So I'm happy to share our specs for our wheel with anyone at any time. So please don't be shy.
And Heather, you will have access to this presentation, and I don't have any problem. We too have an obligation to get good information out. So if this proves to be of use to you in the future to share with someone else, we will certainly make sure you have access to it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, that brings us, we're at 12:37. Olivia, would you like to close out the call?
Basically, I'll just echo your sentiments. Thank you enormously for sharing the wealth of your knowledge and your experience. But we are all, I think, heartened by the level of success for those that you are serving. But more importantly, the use of words is very important. I'm sure they are valued employees at the departments where they're working. And thank you for sharing how they got there.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today.
Have a good day,
Thanks,
everybody.
Heather.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.